So I'm going to go ahead and talk about outcomes and endpoints in this didactic. While many of the concepts that I bring up refer mostly to endpoints and outcomes, generally they apply to any measure of interest or any variable of interest. I just use outcomes and endpoints to simplify the talk. This is in general how I view some of the different constructs and concepts that I'm going to be discussing. At one point we have, let me get my pen, we have sort of the foundation of precision, accuracy, and validity, and these sort represent the foundational concepts of any measurement. And then unique to each different study are all these other intersecting features. We have study design features, which we're going to talk about, how the outcome relates to the causal structures in terms of exposures, the endpoints, intermediate or surrogate endpoints, competing endpoints. Those are all involved in causal structures. And then there's some element that's often very important of the types of data structures. These are unique to each individual study, and I put these as overlapping Venn diagram because a lot of the concepts, unfortunately or necessarily, cross over from one framework to another. Precision, which is the degree to which a variable is the same or similar each and every time you measure it, just like accuracy, reliability, consistency. And accuracy is the degree of which a variable represents the true underlying value. Now we're going to talk more about these two concepts in a future lecture, so I'm going to ski over them rather briefly here. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about validity. So let's start a little bit of the theory. In a sense, this is the qualitative dimension of an outcome. It's the degree to which it measures a phenomenon of interest, kind of answering the question of who cares or why should somebody care. It's hard to actually develop a gold standard for validity or what is valid, and rather this is determined by society or a societal consensus, often between practitioners or experts and the general population or target population. I put this diagram here just to show some balance of sometimes there's things that experts or practitioners think are important or valid, whereas a general population or your target population thinks other things are more important or more valid. So there's no essential gold standard to say something is or is not valid. As just a thought experiment, even sort of the final outcome of death, depending on the context of the study, may or may not be a valid outcome. Death in a palliative care sense may not be the outcome of interest or the most valid outcome in a terminal situation, but rather the elements surrounding the death. That is it pain-free? Is it meaningful? Is it with social support system intact? And what are the effects on that social support system after that death? So just as a thought experiment, any outcome or endpoint really can be put under the strainer of whether or not this is valid in a given context and to whom it's valid. I'm going to separate out the validity into a few nuanced subterms. Start with content validity. This describes the degree to which a measurement represents all aspects or facets of a given phenomenon. And this is generally determined by content experts who know a lot about that phenomenon. Two examples I have here. You could say in a standard IQ test, does this measure all facets or domains of the construct of intelligence, or just a limited number? So that's the content validity. And again, the content validity is important in the context of the study aim, or what you're trying to study. So maybe a test is only trying to study one domain. But this is just one way to think about validity in terms of are there other important facets to measure of a construct. Face validity is really easy. It's the first impression, and this is a degree at which an outcome or an endpoint just seems reasonable, transparent, relevant to a target population. So if you were to show your outcome or explain it to somebody outside of science, would their first impression be that this is important or meaningful, or it's understandable or relevant? A couple examples here. I put one, does a new tool to assess depression seem important, and when you actually show that tool to people who have depression, does it seem to, at first impression, measure something that they experience? The last one, criterion validity, has two different subtypes within it. And this criterion validity overall is a degree to which a measure agrees with other accepted measures. And we're going to circle back around to this when we talk about anchor-based methods in a moment. But this is a primary concern in defining surrogate outcomes. So are the surrogates associated with other measures of importance? And it's often really the primary thing being examined when you're developing assessment tools or predictive tools. Do they agree with other measures or predict other outcomes or events? So this can be divided into two subcategories based on the timing. Concurrent criterion validity, the degree of which a measure agrees with another accepted measure that is occurring at the same time. Here I put is a pneumonia severity score associated with other measures of severity at that time, serum measures of inflammation, a number of or quantity of lung involved on a chest x-ray. Another example would be, does an SAT score, is it associated with high school GPA, which is generally happening at the same time as an SAT score. Just a little bit different is predictive criterion validity. So this is the ability of a measure to reliably predict another outcome of interest in the future. So does that pneumonia severity score discriminate or reliably predict something in the future that's of importance, such as in-hospital mortality? Going back to that SAT example, does the SAT predict a future GPA such as college GPA, or does it predict earnings after graduation from college? Other measures of that are considered important. So these criterion validity use other measures to help assess the validity of the measure you're interested in. So that was really just to give us a little bit of a lexicon of different nuanced descriptions of validity, but to actually help operationalize it or make it useful and practical, we're going to turn to operational concepts of validity.